Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our Redeemer Lutheran Church Bible study of the Book of Psalms. Pastor Eric Kleinschmidt with you once again. If you're looking for the worship service from our congregation, that live stream I'll post up above from this past Sunday. Also on our YouTube channel, you can find the Advent evening services. Those were streamed about 7 p.m. on Wednesday. We also have a 9 a.m. Matin service, but that one is not online. Sorry about that. But thank you for being with me as we continue to study the Psalms of Ascent. We are discussing Psalm 126, 127, and 128 today. Remember that all these Psalms were written for going to the temple, going to Jerusalem, making that pilgrimage, going to church, going up the 15 steps into the worship space. And so these were worship-oriented songs, and they were written at different times. And the first one we're going to see today seems to have been written at a time of great celebration, when the people came back from the Babylonian exile and were able to go to the temple for the first time in decades. So we'll get into that. We're going to go pretty far afield today in our study. A lot of things I didn't think that I would be preparing to talk to you about as I looked at the texts for today, but that's part of the exciting thing about Bible study. It takes us into places that we never expected. God still speaks to many of the things that we have to deal with today, and the Bible gives us a lot of information and a lot of guidance as to how we are to live. And so we're going to see that today as we talk about some issues that are facing Christians in particular that we need to be aware of. All right, let's get into the text. Psalm 126 is the first one up. A Song of Ascent. This one is not labeled as to who wrote it. So we just have to kind of jump in and see where we're going. When the Lord restored, notice the past tense there, the fortunes of Zion, we were like those who dream. We had this dream about how God would help us out and that things would get better. And then it happened. And it was like waking up from a dream and saying, oh, that was a really nice dream. But then also finding, hey, it actually happened. What a great joy. Then our mouth was filled with laughter, and our tongue with shouts of joy. Then they said among the nations, the Lord has done great things for them. For somebody who's steeped in the Old Testament and understands how Israel fell away from God and then was restored to God, often through the affliction of nations around them, including Babylon, one of the themes that comes out is that the nations that don't believe in the true God are making fun of Israel and for their faith in the true God. And so here we see that there's vindication for God's people. And that's a big theme throughout the Old Testament. You'll find that all through the Old Testament and in the Psalms, where it talks about, like, are you going to let these nations deride your name, O Lord? Okay, so we see that God has fulfilled, he's come through. The Lord has done, notice the past tense, great things for us. We are glad. That's probably an understatement. Imagine people that haven't been able to go to church for 40 years and then get to go, and the first time that they get to go back is such joy. I saw that joy after the shutdowns that we had in 2020. We were always open in one way or another, but when people were able to come back to church after a while of being away for whatever reason, such joy that they had, such joy. I remember we had a Circuit Ascension Day service here, and that's linked on our YouTube page. Maybe I can remember to put that up above for you too. Check out our Ascension service. We have the churches from our area come, and we didn't know if we would get 15 people or if we were going to get 150 people. In the end, it was a little bit less than we might expect in a different year. But for COVID, it kind of the tail end of most of the COVID. I mean, I don't know. I really don't have the qualifications to tell you if we are through the COVID threat or not. Okay. I don't know. I don't think anybody knows. But we had a pretty good attendance. And the people that were there, they all commented the same, that they came up and talked to me afterwards. What a joy it was to be back in church together. And in particular, they thanked me for letting them come up for communion and kneel at the rail and be there with fellow, distance, spaced. We tried our best, all of that sort of stuff, right? But that was so meaningful, and there was such joy at something that now, even now, I think we all take for granted that coming together is a true gift. Okay, so imagine that if you haven't been allowed, you've been in captivity, and then you get to go home and you get to go to church. That's what they are rejoicing over in this text. Restore our fortunes, O Lord, like streams in the Negeb. So Israel has a lot of what we might call like floodwaters, right? Dry beds that when it's not the rainy season, it's just dry land. But then when it rains, there's flash floods and they swell. And here we're acknowledging that God has done things for us, and it's asking him to continue to do them and to make our cup overflow. What a bold statement. But that's exactly what we should do if we think that God actually answers prayer. Be bold. Be content, right? And understand that God answers towards his wisdom, but I don't think there's any reason to be stingy in our requests. I do that sometimes in my prayer life. I think if I just ask God for a little thing, I'm more likely to get it. That's not how God works. God is going to give you the best of what he has no matter what. So go big or go home in prayer. Why not? I mean, don't pray for foolish and silly things. Please God, let me win the lottery, right? But I find that I limit my request too often to an all-powerful God. And maybe we have not because we ask not. I don't know. But anyway, let the continue to do for us and let it be like a flash flood, God. Okay? That's kind of what we see here in verse 4. Then there's this acknowledgement: those who sow in tears shall reap with shouts of joy. He who goes out weeping, bearing seed for sowing, shall come home with shouts of joy, bringing his sheaves with him. Certainly this describes the nation of Israel as they went off in captivity to much lamenting, and now they're coming back in much rejoicing, right? Talks about how what might be an affliction here in the present will turn into positive blessing down the road, that perhaps what we are doing now is necessary, and maybe it is unpleasant now, and that is necessary in order to have something pleasant and good down the road. That's all bound up here. If you've ever been to, well, first let's talk about the connection that I see within the text before we go to a connection with a hymn. One of the things that comes out for me, and we had all of the pastors in our circuit and our district president here yesterday, and one of the things that we continue to talk about as pastors is our Lord Jesus's parable of the sower. As we seek to understand church and what we should be concerned about and find comfort in and try to lead and try to serve and do all those things, we're all going back to the parable of the sower, and that's in Matthew 13. And it talks about sowing a seed, all right? So that's the connection that I'm making here. Let's jump to Matthew 13 quick. So I'm just going to read this, the parable of the sower. That same day, Jesus went out of the house and sat beside the sea, and great crowds gathered about him, so that he got into a boat and sat down, and the whole crowd stood on the beach. And he told them many things in parables, saying, A sower went out to sow, and as he sowed, some seeds fell along the path, and the birds came and devoured them. Other seeds fell on rocky ground, where they did not have much soil, and immediately they sprang up, since they had no depth of soil. But when the sun rose, they were scorched, and since they had no root, they withered away. Other seeds fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked them. Other seeds fell on good soil and produced grain, some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. He who has ears, let him hear. Jesus then goes on to tell kind of the purpose of the parables, and in this chapter, he'll just tell parable after parable after parable. Thankfully, he does jump back and explain them, okay? So we want to jump down here to verse 18, and we're going to see Jesus explaining his own teaching, okay? He says, "Hear then the parable of the sower. When anyone hears the word of the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what has been sown in his heart. This is what was sown along the path." So people hear about Jesus, but they don't understand and they don't seek anything more than that. And so it doesn't profit them, right? And the world and the devil, they just take it away and it doesn't produce anything. That's some people. As for what was sown on rocky ground, this is the one who hears the word and immediately receives it with joy. But he has no root in himself, but it endures for a while. And when tribulation or persecution arises on account of the word, he immediately falls away. Okay? We could liken that to some of the stuff that happened during COVID, but I really don't think we were all that persecuted. I think it was ill-advised and dumb, and I definitely think Satan was at work behind closing churches for a time, but I don't think it was an organized persecution of our government. I'm just not one of those people, okay? So I don't think that this is really the part that affects us, but we can see how that would happen, right? Here's where it really comes to the rubber meets the road for me. Verse 22, "As for what was sown among thorns, this is the one who hears the word, but the cares of the world and the deceitfulness of riches choke it out, and it proves unfruitful." That's kind of what we see happening. People that were here and here religiously and for all intents and purposes seem to be devout Christian people, they seem to be choked out now. Or that they sprang up and then withered away and a flash in the pan kind of thing. We just, as pastors, we kind of said, we see this parable of Jesus, this prophecy of what he tells us is happening and will continue to happen. We saw it during COVID, and we're still seeing it, and it's kind of sad. But it's exactly what Jesus said. Jesus ends on a high note. "As for what was sown on good soil, this is the one who hears the word and understands it. He indeed bears fruit and yields in one case 100-fold, another 60, and another 30. The yielding isn't, the amount of yielding isn't what's important. It's just the fact that they do produce good fruit, that it's alive and well in their heart. And that's another thing that we're seeing as pastors. People that are discovering faith for the first time, and they're hungry and they are fruitful, and it's a joy to watch and a joy to walk with them through that journey. And so being a pastor these days is very much highs and lows, as you see people get choked out, but also you see people growing. And I don't think I've ever seen such a disparity between the two so often as I have in the last year and a half, 2 years. So it's highs and lows. So if you catch me and I seem low, it's probably because I'm dwelling on those that are choking out. If you catch me and I seem high and happy, it's probably because I've been talking with people that want to learn more and are growing in their faith and love it. And that's a joy. So it's kind of up and down all through the day. Sorry. Jesus also talks about a parable about the weeds. That there are weeds amongst the wheat, that in the field of God's church, that there are true Christians and there are non-Christians, and they look the same, but at the end they will be separated out. He talks about the mustard seed and the leaven, that how one kind of bad attitude or person that's working against the kingdom can infect the others. That's all there. He explains them: hidden treasure, pearl of great price, net of fish. I mean, he just goes, and after he tells all of this, right, is when he's rejected by the people in his hometown. This guy's nuts. Who cares what he says, right? Amazing. Even his brothers and his family stand against him after he teaches them in all these parables and explains them. Jesus himself preached and explained, and then his own family and his own friends and the people of his hometown rejected him. Wow. So anyway, when we read Psalm 126 about he who goes out weeping, bearing the seed for sowing, shall come home with shouts of joy, bringing his sheaves with him. As pastors, we're called to scatter the seed of the gospel, to preach it wherever we go. And sometimes it doesn't produce anything, but sometimes it does. And at the end, we will see all the harvest of all the work that we've been doing. And as the souls are like the sheaves of grain, right? And people are carried into heaven to live and grow forevermore. What a joy that is. So you may be familiar with a hymn that kind of goes along with this imagery if you've ever been to an ordination or an installation where pastors are brought to the Lord's church and called to preach the word and scatter the gospel seeds. There's one in our hymnal. It's hymn number 586. It's called Preach You the Word and Plant It Home. And so we're going to look at the text. I don't know how to do this better so that maybe you can see it a little bit better. It looks like it's all on the page there. You're going to have to kind of squint a little bit. Here's the text. Preach you the word and plant it home to men who like or like it not. The word that shall endure and stand when flowers and men shall be forgot. We know how hard, O Lord, the task your servant bade us undertake, to preach your word and never ask what prideful profit it may make. The sower sows his reckless love, scatters abroad the goodly seed, preaching of the gospel, intent alone that all may have the wholesome loaves that all men need. And now here's the last one that kind of goes towards what we've been talking about. Though some be snatched, and some be scorched, and some be choked and matted flat, the sower seeds, his heart cries out, "Oh, what of that? Oh, what of that?" Of all his scattered plenteousness, 1/4 waves ripe on hill and flat, and bears a harvest hundredfold. Ah, what of that? What of that? So, a lot of it's choked out, but hey, even if some of it grows, look at the harvest it produces. And that's a joy. That's a joy. And that's what we pray for as we talk about the spreading of the gospel. We have to acknowledge that some people just will not believe, all right, are not Christians, do not want to be, right? But there are people that when they hear it, they do grow and they produce a harvest of righteousness. And so, preach you the word and plant it home and never faint. The harvest Lord, who gave the sower seed to sow, will watch and tend his planted word. This is a Lutheran hymn, woohoo! Written by a man named Martin Franzmann, who was born in Minnesota. All right, a Lutheran from Minnesota. Actually, he is an author, and he wrote several hymns. And hold on. I have to go full video here. So, Martin Franzmann, Romans. It's one book of his that I have. A good Lutheran guy, and wrote some really fantastic hymns. And so, Preach You the Word and Plant at Home is not one that we use very often in regular congregational worship, but it's a very popular one for installations and ordinations of pastors who are called to preach, right? So, reflections of Matthew 13 in the hymn, obviously, and also I would say also a little bit of Psalm 126. All right? So that was Psalm 126, a beautiful psalm about preaching the word and being glad when God brings us back into his house, right? Asking God to continue to provide for us all good things. And this is a joyful psalm, which is a bit of a change from the psalms that we've been studying where they've kind of said, hey, let us go. Now we're saying they're there, and what a joy that is. I'm going to take a break. I'm going to switch my internet tabs over, and then we'll come back for Psalm 127. See you in a little bit. Welcome back. Hopefully that all recorded just fine. I really don't want to go through the splicing we had to go through last week after my ill-fated field trip, which I've heard from some of you that you appreciated, and I do appreciate that. Thank you for telling me those things. The worst thing is imagine that you go through all this work to produce this, and then nobody watches and nobody cares. And that's disheartening. But so thank you for those that are watching, and thank you for those that tell me that you do, because it makes this worthwhile. Okay. Psalm 127. This is going to be a little bit different, all right? A Song of Ascents of Solomon. So you see that there. So did Solomon write this one? Maybe. Is it written by somebody that knew Solomon and is attributing to him, giving him honor? That's possible too. Is it by a scribe or a student that studied Solomon's Psalms and it's after his style? That's possible. We just don't know. But in the scriptures, it's attributed and credited to Solomon. And Solomon was considered the master builder. Of course, he was the one that actually built the temple. David had come up and said, I'm going to do this. And God said, well, no, you're not. Your son is. But thank you for thinking of me. So Solomon really builds the first temple. And because of that, he got a reputation for being a great builder. One that's then carried on to Masonic lodges, by the way. I think that they go back to one of Solomon's scribes and they learn secrets about life and whatever. Solomon had this reputation for being a master builder, and that continues even today. So let's look at what Solomon's talking about. He says, unless the Lord builds the house, those who build it labor in vain. Well, you know that Jesus was a carpenter, but I don't know that he built any houses. What's Solomon talking about? Well, obviously he's using a metaphor about something. What is the house? What is the metaphor that the house represents? What are we talking about here? We'll have to wait. Unless the Lord watches over the city, the watchman stays awake in vain. It is vain that you rise up early and go late to rest. So getting up early and going to bed late doesn't profit you anything. Eating the bread of anxious toil, for he gives to his beloved sleep. So the point that Solomon, or whoever is writing this, is trying to make is that without God's will, without God's design, all your effort is vain. It doesn't amount to anything. But when God takes care of it, when God does it, then all you have to do is sleep. So you sleep and let God take care of it. What a peaceful understanding of the way of life, right? So what is Solomon talking about when he says house? What is this standing in for? Well, we see it in verse 3. Behold, children are a heritage from the Lord, the fruit of the womb a reward. Solomon isn't talking about a physical house. He's talking about a household. He's talking about a family. And he's saying, unless God builds your family, unless he's the cornerstone, unless he's the foundation, he's the walls and the roof, unless he's the bulwark around the city and the watchman, and unless he's the one who is in your family, everything is in vain. And if you have Jesus, if you have God watching over your family, building your family up, you have peace and sleep. Doesn't mean your family is always peaceful. But this is what Solomon writes. And it's similar to what Solomon writes in his not parables. I got parables in the mind. Proverbs. All right. The Proverbs are full of earthly wisdom, and a lot of it has to do with family life, right? So this very well could have been written by Solomon. It's definitely in that vein. Behold, children are a heritage from the Lord. Children are good. Like arrows in the hand of a warrior are the children of one's youth. Do you see that? Ooh. Blessed is the man who fills his quiver with them. He shall not be put to shame when he speaks with his enemies in the gate. All right. What I'm about to tell you is not popular, even amongst Christian circles. Okay? Having children is a good thing. Having lots of children is a good thing. It's actually commanded in Scripture. A lot of our modern notions about relationships are influenced by Satan to go against God's first command to Adam and Eve. Things like birth control, limitations on the size of families, how we interact with people, families that have a lot of children, are often not godly. You remember the struggles that we had with Obamacare. We had Christians suing and saying, we're not going to follow this. We don't want abortifacients. There are some forms of birth control that do not prevent conception, but rather terminate conception. That's the killing of a human being. And that's why we object to it. So you got to be careful and you got to investigate. And I'm willing to investigate with you. Okay? All right? But this idea that we have that we should wait to have kids after we've been married a while and we get to know each other and we need to get married after we've dated for a while and we don't want to get married too young. That's a bad idea. It's a recipe for divorce. Blah, 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 blah. Not biblical. Look at the text. Behold, children are a heritage from the Lord, the fruit of a womb a reward. Like arrows in the hand of a warrior are the children of one's youth. Blessed is the man who fills his quiver with them. Okay? I'm 42. My son is 3.5. I wish that I had met my wife a decade before I did, and gotten married years before we did. I had kids years before now, right? Because I'm looking at it like, okay, when Judah's ready to go to college, I'm going to be close to retirement. hauling a sofa up 3 flights of stairs to the dorm. I don't think so, right? If he, yeah. So stop this nonsense. We take kids who biologically are turning into adults with the biological motive to be fruitful and multiply, and we say, oh, no, yeah, you're too young to get married, right? You got to wait. You got to date some people and have some terrible experiences, and then you can come together in your 30s, and then you can rush to beat some biological clock and have a whole bunch of stress, and yeah, that pattern's not working. Hasn't been. And yet, we still have people talking and scowling at people with 5, 6, 7, 8 kids, like, even in churches. How sad. How absolutely sad. So where do we see this otherwise? Go back to Genesis 1. Genesis 1. And God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. Subdue it. The first commandment given to Adam and Eve, even before the fall into sin, is to have kids. To have a lot of kids. And in response, we have a world that says, no, if you have more than 1 kid, 2 kids, you're putting a carbon depletion rate and you're doing a disservice to your fellow human beings, all this other stuff. Man. So let's look at some facts, right? Have you ever heard about total fertility rate or replacement fertility rate? Yeah. So it makes sense, right? If we are going to exist as a society, right, you have people that get older and can't take care of themselves and are going to die. So you need younger people that can continue to work to keep up things like hospitals and doctors and medicine and nursing homes and all of that. We need that. That's the way that society, humanity functions, okay? So if you have 2 people that get married, they need to have 2 kids in order to replace themselves, to keep things standard, in order for society to be supported and continue. There's not a developed country in the world that has a replacement rate at that level. They're all declining. Okay? I got a map for you. Let me find that map. All right, this is from the Population Reference Bureau 2020. All right, you see over on the left-hand side, there's this gradient, and purple is a replacement rate of 7 children per man and woman, all right? And blue is 1, okay? Where we want to see is greenish yellow. That's your replacement rate, all right? Notice America, very much in blue. Russia, very much in blue. I believe Russia actually outlawed adoptions for a while because they didn't want their people going to other places because they were recognizing a problem. There's also been outlaws on abortion in some places, not because they find it wrong, but because they're recognizing that they need people to support their economy in the future, and they're not doing that, right? So you can see in all these places, we're not replacing the people that we have. And climate change people will be like, oh, that's good because it reduces our carbon footprint. Human beings are a parasite. I guess I don't care if I'm a parasite. I still need to survive, and I want humanity to survive. Look at where population is booming, right? It also happens to be one of the places where Christianity is booming. That's a good thing as far as I'm concerned. Our future is in Africa, really. Awesome things happening there. But look at the European countries and America. We all bought into this idea, and now we're top heavy, and it's going to really put a strain on the generations under us. So if you believe that this is actually a good thing, you can have that belief. The reality is you will be bred out. If you decide that I'm not going to have kids, as more and more millennials are doing, we'll be married, but we're not going to have any children. Well, that you can do that, and then that ideology dies with each couple that does that. And you'll be replaced by people that think they should be fruitful and multiply. So nature will naturally correct itself in this way. It's just how it works. We see that in populations all over the place. But yeah, so in the church, we have these ideas that people are too young to get married. They should wait until they're older. I don't think so. When I counsel couples and they say, well, we want to be married and get to know each other first and enjoy being married before we have the burden of children, I try to correct that because they're absolutely wrong. Children are the greatest thing that happens. It's the greatest thing that happened to me. I love being a dad. All right. Why just live a selfish life that's about me and my partner? No. I live for somebody else. And I want to see him have more than I do, and be better, and make the world an awesome place, and contribute, and enjoy, and do all those things. And above all, I pray for his faith, so that I will continue to be able to get to know him in eternity, long after I'm gone, because I'm older and I'm going to die long before he will, God willing. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. It's a little bit personal, but yeah, let young people get married. Be active in their seeking a spouse. Tell them what they should look for. Pray for them. Be a part of that process in finding a godly spouse for them, of supporting their marriage, of supporting them having children. Children are always a blessing. Wish more of them would be born in wedlock rather than out of it, but they're always a blessing, okay? So let's try to build up families. That's Christians. That's our first commandment. Be fruitful, multiply. God sets a family in order. Man, woman, here's children. Be a family. Let's try to support that, all right? The world is against big families. It's against marriage. It's against young people getting married and having kids, as dumb as that sounds. And we've bought into it in the church sometimes. So when you see that big family come into church, don't sit there and go, oh, man, how do they, go out to eat afterwards? Why don't you take them out to eat? They'd love that. Sure. Give them a gift card. All right. When you schedule church events, let there be a family rate. Just say, hey, you got 10 people that are coming to the picnic, rather than charge you $10 per adult and $5 per kid. You know what? Give us $15, give us $10 and call it good, right? We have other people that would gladly, do that. Why can't we support that? It's godly, and we just got to get it out of our brain. This devil is good at what he does. Takes the first commandment given to God's people, and he is attacking it, and he's doing a great job of it. So let's fight back. off my soapbox. All right. The next break is going to take a little bit longer because I got to redo all my tabs because I'm trying not to put too much of a drain on the computer install like we did last week. All right. So just a little bit of review from Psalm 127. God has to build the house. He's talking about families. Make Jesus a center of your family. Pray for your kids that they would find spouses who love Jesus, right? And then take your kids to the place where Jesus is, church, right? And then talk about it in your home. Study it at home so that Jesus is everywhere they go, so that you will have eternity to get to know and enjoy and rejoice with your children. That's the plan. See you on the other side for Psalm 128. Okay, I think we're ready. Oh, we'll see. Still thinking over there. You can't see that on your screen, but I can on mine. And hopefully it'll take us where we need to go. Psalm 128. Here we are. Blessed is everyone who fears the Lord, who walks in his ways. So this continues the kind of the theme before. It was not written by Solomon. See, it just says Psalm of Ascent there, right? So everyone that fears the Lord and walks in his ways, there's a blessing for that. You shall eat the fruit of the labor of your hands. You shall be blessed, and it shall be well with you. Notice how, for those who fear the Lord, the labor of their hands is profitable. Their work actually produces enjoyment. Contrast this with what was said in Psalm 127, that unless the Lord builds the house, those who build it labor in vain. So if you don't have God and you're not following God, it's going to be empty, right? Eating the bread of anxious toil. Doesn't that sound delicious? Oh, no, it doesn't. So blessed is the man who fears the Lord. He shall eat the fruit of your labor of your hands. You shall be blessed. It shall be well with you. It does not mean you won't have tribulation or strife. It just means that you're going to have peace and that God has it all planned out in the end and that an eternity of peace and joy and provision await you. What a wonderful gift. Again, we're here at the family. We're at the family table. Your wife will be like a fruitful vine within your house. That means that she's going to have a lot of kids, and it's going to be such a blessing for your family, right? Your children will be like olive shoots around your table, growing up fast, and you're going to be like, how did you get so big, right? Such joy is expressed here in these two Psalms about big families. It's amazing that we have a weirdo relationship with that, right? Behold, thus shall the man be blessed who fears the Lord. Notice that. Who keeps his commandments is couched in this idea of having a family. Family is the biggest accomplishment and reward that you can have in this life. Do our choices and our scheduling reflect that? I mean, if we are Christians and we believe the Bible and we think it has value and we want to do things the biblical way, and the Bible speaks this way about families, about being around the table, do we schedule things that way? Do we allow our people to be at home around their table more often? Or are we asking them to come to nonsensical meetings that could be handled in an email? Good question. We try not to schedule things at 5 o'clock here or at noon. I try not to call people during those hours. Now, I know that there's not many people. I'm not home at 5 o'clock to have dinner with my family because I'm here. I know that's true for a lot of you. Even if you are home, teenagers up in the room with the hot pocket and the kids walking around with a bowl of Cheerios somewhere, and you're like, okay, well, I guess I'll have this leftover sandwich, and then I gotta go do this and do that, right? I know that's the reality for many of us. Is that good? No. So if we can acknowledge that as a church, how can we change that? How can we encourage people to be home around their table? How can we encourage families, to be fruitful, to multiply? Those are questions that we have as church, as we have God's people. But it really begins with getting rid of this sour attitude we have about young people getting married and about big families. It boggles my mind that we can simultaneously say you're too young to get married, it's going to be a divorce. And how many people I hear that have been divorced and say, I got married too young. Not gonna swear on here. I'm not. But horse hockey. All right. So nonsense. You can't blame it on youth. Made a bad decision, sure. Should have waited longer to get to know the person, fine. But it had nothing to do with it. You were just too young. So we can simultaneously degrade young people who get married, and then the number of Christians that can approve of people cohabitating before they get married, an idea that, if they practice this, then they're more likely to stay married, even though all the studies show that's not true, even though the Bible speaks against such sin, living in sin, right? As being, it's like one of the worst things that you can do. And I'm befuddled by the number of Christian people that will simultaneously say you're too young to get married, but living together is okay. So if we change our mind and we go back to a more biblical mindset, we will be better off. We really will. So work on that. I'm working on it all the time, trying to figure ways we can support families. Trying to be better at my own, all that. Okay? All right. Fruitful vine, olive shoots. Oh, wrong button. There we go. The Lord bless you from Zion. May you see the prosperity of Jerusalem all the days of your life. And look at this. May you see your children's children. Peace be upon Israel. May you hold your grandchildren in your arms, is the prayer of this psalm. That is the height of being blessed from God in this psalm. It's the whole purpose of the entire nation of Israel, that you would be blessed by the Lord to hold your grandchildren. That's my prayer too. Now, I often pray that God will just let me see my grandchildren. And doing the math, I'm like, okay, Judah's probably going to have to get married young, right? So we're praying for a godly spouse, right? I'm not above Lutheran arranged marriages, just putting that out there. Statistically, I think arranged marriages work out better than anything else. Again, it's one of those facts that we just don't like to consider because arranged marriage seems so archaic, right? And yes, there's cultural things that play into that, but I think there's a lot less divorce for arranged marriages than romantic ones. So anyway, something to consider. To hold your children's children. Now, here's something cool. Do you know how long Adam lived? 930 years. I'm not even sure how many generations of his great grandchildren Adam was able to hold in his arms and to tell about what walking with God in the garden was like. I cannot fathom that. Imagine Thanksgiving for Adam's family, and he's just surrounded by generation after generation of his grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and he gets to teach them and tell them, and then they do that to their kids, right? And this goes on for generations. It's not like Adam lived 930 years and then his kids lived to be 45. No, it keeps going down the line. They're all up there. It's hundreds of years. Methuselah is the oldest one. Oh, well, wait here. Hold on. Oh, wrong button. No, we don't have technical difficulties. We're fine. We're just fine. This is what I want. Adam's descendants, right? When Adam had lived 130 years, he fathered a son in his own likeness after his image, and he named him Seth, right? So we had Cain and Abel, and now we got Seth. And there's probably, maybe they had girls, all girls in between there. I don't know. Days of Adam after he fathered Seth were not 800 years. Adam lived 930 years. Seth lived 105 years, and he fathered Enosh. All the days of Seth were 912 years. Enosh lived 905 years. Kenan, 910 years. And then you get to Methuselah. Oh, no, we're not there. Mahalalel, sorry. 895. Enoch, 962. Jared was 962. Enoch was young because God took him right up to heaven. He didn't even die. Wow. And then, here's Methuselah. All the days of Methuselah were 969 years, and he died. It's the oldest one, right? And what about Noah? After Noah was 500 years, Noah fathered Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So we get to the flood. Noah actually lived 950 years. Noah. So his great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren, how many generations that is, he told the flood to. He could describe that. It wasn't just words on a page that happened long ago. No, you had the guy who built the ark still there. You see him at family reunions. I mean, it's just well, quickly, let's just run through, like, why did these people live so long? All right. Before the flood, all right, people lived 900 some years. Okay, why? There's a couple things that are happening. Remember that Adam and Eve were intended to live forever, so they're eternal. Sin starts to take effect right after they disobey God and eat of the fruit, and they start to die. It takes a while for the effects of sin to kind of build up, and death really is a cumulative effect of sin, right? That's why we're dying. That's why things going wrong. That's all the result of sin. So for people that were eternal, it took 930 years for sin to finally claim Adam, right? Also, the world was a little bit different back then because everything was made to work perfectly. And so there weren't the contaminants and the problems that we have because it was meant to fully support Adam and Eve. And then after the sin, it starts working against them. And apparently that took time. You have plants that are growing to a massive size, reptiles, dinosaurs that are massive, right? The world is built to produce that sort of life and that abundance, right? Then at the flood, not only do you have the earth opening up and water coming up and rain coming down from clouds, but you also have the firmament being torn open, which we believe was like an envelope of water vapor, something that covered the earth and made it like a greenhouse, okay? You know what greenhouse does to the plants. It makes them grow big. It filters out the UV light that we all know is so bad for us, right? So in the flood, that's torn open. Water rushes down, things move, massive destruction. And then afterwards, you don't have that filter anymore. And so the UV light starts wreaking havoc. And now plants don't grow as well. And plant eaters don't grow as well. The meat eaters don't grow as well. Some things just can't survive, can't be supported. Okay? Dinosaurs die out, right? And all of a sudden, human lifespan starts. And that's where we are today. And we think that we're bold because, hey, we average lifespan went from 70 to 75 this past decade. Woo-hoo-hoo, right? I don't even know what it's up to now. 80? Well, great. Yeah. Noah lived 930 years. Yeah. We are meant to be eternal. Sin is taking an effect. And the closer you are to when things were perfect and good, the longer it took for sin to break that down. And now we're so many generations after that. It takes 75, 85, 100, 110, 120 years. But that's not a lot in the grand scheme of things. So I think that's one explanation as to why these people lived so long and how they did it, other than just God willed that they would do that. But imagine the influence they had on their children and their children's children, living out the joy of Psalm 128, where it says, may you see your children's children. And again, the family is so important to God's design and God's will. And these Psalms rejoice in family life. But remember, what are these Psalms written about? These Psalms of Ascent. About going to worship. Are you connecting the dots? Family going to worship together. One of the best things in the world, according to God Himself and the Bible. Priorities. Blessings. Hope your family can be with you in the pew for church. Or if you have to start right now, be with you on your sofa watching church. Rejoice when you can walk up the steps again and walk into God's house as they did back then. God's blessings to you. I'll put the link to last week's study up above. Next week is Christmas week. It's going to be crazy. I will try my best to get with you because I do like studying, and I know that you appreciate it, and that makes it all worthwhile. So God's blessings on your work, on your study, and on your life. I will see you next week. Take care.